Well, riding starts in the head. So, having grown up in the Motor City, I always thought I was riding. So, the first time I got on a motorcycle, it didn't have an engine. Having grown up in Detroit, it was a Motor City, so of course we all had a love for cars. My brothers and I wanted to get into mini bikes and motorcycles, and my mother said it's not going to happen. And it was this guy in the neighborhood who'd always come by on his dirt bike. And we eventually found one at the end of the block we called the dead end, the big hill. I've since gone back, it's really a little hill. And we found this bike with no motor, so we pushed each other around for quite a long time. And then, of course, as with everybody, we moved from bicycles to mini bikes to motorcycle. I've been racing the last 6 or 7 years, vintage exhibition racing. Wow, probably been on motorcycle, or as we say, behind bars, probably just the last 15, 20 years. I'm Randy Detroit Hayward. Folks call me Detroit. Grew up in Detroit, Michigan, hence the name. I love living this two-wheel life. People have called me a builder, probably more of a promoter, enthusiast. The beauty of riding for me is not only riding the bike, but trying to trace the history of that particular machine. And as you do, being a historian, then led to the history of trying to find about the black riders who established a footprint in history that people didn't know about. And in one of these journeys, I learned about this famous club, the East Bay Dragons. Started out as a car club and was kind of catching the heat from the folks around them, law enforcement as well, and that led to a motorcycle club. And then I found their book, Soul on Wheels, and was fascinated that here's a club that started in 1959, and it has the same president in one chapter. I'm in a club and we have over 100 chapters, and we speak about that. We have chapters everywhere. We have a chapter in South Korea, but here was a club that started in Oakland, and it started during this very volatile time in Oakland, California, during civil rights. And usually those become footnotes of that time, become footnotes in history book. But here was a club that's still in existence. The East Bay Dragons, 1959, one president, they call him President for Life, Toby Gene Livingston. Then I discovered his book some years ago, and I was in Oakland. So I did a cold call. I put my vest on, I went and knocked on the door, and I was invited in. I shared that I was standing on their shoulders of keeping this two-wheel lifestyle alive. I shared with them some of my vintage racing pictures, and then our equal passion allowed for a really enriched conversation. I got a tour of the clubhouse and had hoped to go visit and sit down with the President for Life. I gave him a picture, and I was so honored that one of the members said, we will hang this in our clubhouse. So again, finding a way to connect history. So in hearing of Toby Jean's passing, there was an audible no, out of my mouth, because I wanted to personally say thank you for not only your contribution to the two-wheel lifestyle, but to the experience of the black rider. They're famous. I had set a date to go there before I did my cold call, and the gentleman said, well, you got to make sure you get here on this particular day. And so folks are really discovering how important the East Bay Dragons have been to the motorcycle scene, the two-wheel life, and definitely the experience of the black rider. And when you connect that, you can go all the way back to 1913, where there was this black riding circuit or race circuit that was raced through the South, Atlanta, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so I love to find a way to connect these webs of history and show how they intersect. And the East Bay Dragons is an important part of that web. when you talk about the history of riding, it shouldn't be the history of the Black Rider, but given that so many accounts of history have left out those experiences, we have to frame it in the history of the Black Rider. When you talk about William Johnson having the first dealership in Somers, New York, first Harley-Davidson dealership in Somers, New York, I've gone and spent time there. I sat down with his niece. I've spoke with his grandchildren and talked about the innovations that he added to racing and hill climbing, right? When you talk about Cliff Vaughn and his work with the producers of Easy Rider, the legendary Sugar Bear, and his unbelievable contribution to motorcycle and the chopper lifestyle. So when you talk about the Toby Jeans and those founding members of the East Bay Dragon, it then connects you to riding, and it also gives me an opportunity to share with kids who look like me that we've been in this game a long time, and too often that is lost. And so as a ambassador, we have a responsibility, all of us who ride or just love motorcycles or have anything to do with the company, to share that history and its important contribution. I can't imagine folks are riding choppers that don't flop and has a Sugar Bear front end and don't know about Sugar Bear, or love hill climbing but don't know the contribution of William Johnson and his innovation around power to get up the hill. You know, it's important that we make sure those names aren't lost to history. You had Hall, Damon, Wade, Horace, Midnight, Blayton, Bones the Outlaw, Jones, Reedham, and Reeder. These were guys who raced on this circuit from 1913 to 1921 in the South. And a lot of people don't know about them. And so as a Black rider, it's important to do that. I know Harley-Davidson for some years had given out this Black riding patch, the African American Heritage patch. I wish they continue that, so that when someone walks into one dealership or museum, hopefully they then become a researcher, a curator, and then we don't just have a few folks sharing this story. Been a history buff my whole life. We had a farm down in Hawkinsville, Georgia, and I would bring home some of the farm tools. And my dad would ask, why did I bring that junk home? And I would say, Dad, because you touched it, because Granddad touched it. You worked on the farm, you know. And of course, he would think I was a weird kid. And then that grew into, as we all should, when we get into anything, we should learn the history about it. So as as an African-American guy in this country, it's so important to learn history. So I started collecting Black Americana 35 years ago. And it touches every aspect of American history. It's pretty amazing, right? So I had 2,000 artifacts. So I'm just collecting and I'm loving it, and I'm getting into different exhibits. This is on antebellum, this is on cars, this is on motorcycles, this is on sports. And it was for my personal pleasure, just having my artifacts throughout the house or in various collections. And last year, I decided to leave K-12 education. And that was a hard thing to do because I've been working with young people over 25 years. And I was at a motorcycle event in Santa Barbara, and a guy was looking at my 29 Harley. We had talked in Pismo briefly, and we began to talk about history and bikes. And I talked about my collection, and I talked about that I also have a music collection, B.B. King signed guitar, George Clinton signed artifacts, Kanye West shoes that I got from his mother, right? At a motorcycle event, and I mentioned a B.B. King guitar, and the guy said, if you ever want to sell it, let me know. So when I left the formal education, as anyone knows, when you're collecting bikes, it can get expensive at times. So I called the guy about the guitar, and he bought it immediately. and it depressed me immediately. I said, maybe I'll just sell the collection and get out of collecting. And I had an epiphany. I have this collection and the world's not seeing it. I'm missing educating young people. So I married the two, take my collection and began to take it around the country so that folks can see it and we can talk about history. History has bright passes and dark passes, right? And if we don't talk about it, then we don't turn the young people into researchers. So I took my artifacts, I began to contact places, and places began to contact me, and I would travel with curator gloves and let people handle the artifacts. I was contacted by the company, Harley-Davidson, during Black History Month, and I took about 50, 60 artifacts out to Milwaukee, and here I was at headquarters at Juneau and talking to Harley execs and riders about the Black riding experience and showing artifacts. And schools, I started visiting schools. So now I have these artifacts and I travel all over the country. It's changed quite a bit. And so it's been quite enriching. And then it opens the eyes for the listener, the visitor, to become a historian, a curator of their own, because history is constant. I mean, when I raced and Willie G signed my racing jersey, that immediately went into my museum. So kids who look like me can see that not only was I on the beach racing in Milwaukee, but I have this jersey and it still has oil on it and it's signed by the chairman, William Davidson. So the history in sharing that is important, and what better way to share my 35-year collection than go around the country and talk about the impact of Black folks in this country. I left home at 19. My neighbor convinced me to go into the service and serve my country and how proud my parents would be. He didn't tell me about basic training. And don't get me wrong, I'm an Air Force kind of guy, so all the Marine folks out there are going, he didn't go to basic training, he went to the country club. But nonetheless, I got out. My last tour of duty was in Bedford, Massachusetts. Bedford, Concord, Lexington is the seat of the American Revolution. Great area. Here was this city guy living out in the sticks and loving it. I started working after I got out. I started working as an outreach worker, and I was working with young adults, 16 to 21, who had either been wards of the state or had some medical conditions and had to learn to live on their own. And at times it was frustrating because I always wondered who failed these young people. But I did the work, and I hope I did it nobly. But between Bedford and Boston, where I would hang out, I would pass Cambridge Square, and I was taking classes on base before I got out. And when I started taking classes off base, I met a mentor, and she convinced me that I had something to offer young people and I should go into education because it would reduce some of the frustration and I would catch kids in the earlier years where we could really shape them. So I went to school and I got my undergrad and then got a master's in education and formally became an educator. I mean, I used to go to shows and the older cats would begin to tell me what I should do, and I might have a vision about how I want to design my motorcycle. And without even hearing that, I hear a no, right? So the first thing I tell people is to find out what type of riding they're interested in. Is it enduro? Is it rally? Is it quarter mile? Is it board track? Is it what Billy Lane is doing down in Florida with bank tracks? Is it what Mel's doing in Jersey? So the first thing to do is to get the young people out to see that. Race a Gentleman, when we were in Santa Barbara, I actually went to a school in Santa Barbara and talked to a group of students at a machine shop and brought my 29 Harley there to get them excited. And then when it was over, I asked the teacher, can they take out their cell phones and take turns sitting on the bike? We go to shows, we don't even want the young people to touch the bikes, to come across the rope. Every show I do, I make sure if I see a young kid looking, I ask their parents, can they Do they have a camera? Can they sit on the bike? So we got to get them to the shows. We got to see what they envision about the future for riding. We got to teach them how to ride. We got to talk about safety. We got to give them the historical lens. I was on a forum and they were talking about the live wire, and all the old cats were like, no, I would never, ever ride a live wire. I'm like, this is 2020. First of all, electric vehicles have been around since the early 1900s, so we are embracing what's been there. But imagine telling the young people you're not into electric vehicles. And then, of course, I tell everyone you haven't ridden a live wire, so your tune would change, and then you would encourage people. So the first thing is really talking and listening to the young people, and then showing them pictures, opening books, and taking them to shows. Detroit's Antique Motorcycle Show, or the Damn Show. And I tried not to be profane, so people kept coming up to my bike and going, wow, damn. And so I said, I had to do something with that, because it was a shocker. And it was a shocker in a couple ways. It's very few African-American cats collecting the early vintage stuff. And I want to change that. And so I know about the shows around the country. Born Free, I've been to a few. Mama Tried. Now we're virtual shows, the No Show. But I recognize that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to combine my love of history, art, and motorcycles. So, and again, staying organic. So when you walk in, you feel like you're in a motorcycle family. I often say my motorcycle family. And about 5 years ago, I was talking about putting a show on, but there was this great show in Detroit called Oily Souls. The rock star, I always equate Oily Souls to Prince Roger Nelson, the way he did these shows. They were called his hit and miss shows, right? So Prince would announce 24 hours before that he's coming to your city and do this great show and then disappear. So Oily Souls was like that for 4 or 5 years. People who were in the know knew, and the other people found out 24, 48 hours later and was like, wow, I missed that. Then Oily Souls left, and I had been planning this show for 5 years, and I realized I didn't need to do it because Oily Souls was in town. And my wife, who had been hearing my vision and dream for some years, said, you could have did it while the show was going, but now that there's nothing like that here, you do it. And that's what I did. It's an invitational. It's a damn invitational, but it's the Damn Show. It's Detroit's Antique Motorcycle Show. I invite builders to bring their bikes out. And then when you get there, you not only meet the builders and see the bikes, but we really try to highlight the history. So you'll see pictures throughout the show. Last year, I believe I had a cutaway diagram of a knucklehead. I had a 6-foot picture of a pan and a knucklehead. I was contacting all these people with young people saying, come to my show. And last year was the first year, and within the month after, the show had already outgrown itself for the next year. And I went from a 2,000 square foot building for my show, and this year to be held in a 10,000 square foot building with 4 open bay doors, ample parking, because I really want to promote antique motorcycles. You asked a question earlier, how do we get young people into riding? Not just young people, but older people as well. Let them see the history. Let them see what we feel when we're riding a tank shift bike, right? And what better way to do that than a free show where you come out and participate. Really, riding for me, it's like this level of purity, because you really do have to be in tune with your motorcycle. 4 wheels, you can make mistakes, and you sometimes can make serious mistakes and correct, right? But when you only have 2 wheels, you really do need to become in tune with your motorcycle. And having bikes range from 1910 to modern bikes, the organicness, the purity of it becomes even more so when I'm having a tank shift with my left hand, and Harley-Davidson rocker clutch with my left foot, and throttle with my right hand. I mean, it's an experience I try to explain to people, but it's usually they have to live it. So there's a level of freedom um, that you have in something that's pure and organic. And what blows my mind is when I'm on these bikes and I think about over 100 years ago, someone said, I can take this bicycle and make it go faster, right? And then being connected to that level of history is amazing. So for me, riding is organic. I mean, you really do, for me, become one with the bike. And then if I'm riding a vintage bike and having a tank shift and go through all those emotions, it's pretty amazing.